Hi, everybody. Welcome to all you fire drill firefighters. So happy to see you. And to those of you joining for the first time, welcome to the Fire Drill Fridays family, where we are building community, learning about the climate crisis, and taking action to address it. Do you know that each of you can help our movement grow by sharing today's show so your friends and colleagues can join the movement? Please take a moment right now and hit the share button. The more people understand the gravity of the potential climate crisis and are willing to act, the more chance we have to minimize it. Now, today and for the rest of the month, we're going to be talking about issues that are hitting the Gulf Coast especially hard. Next week, we're going to be discussing Greenpeace's co-authored report on fossil fuel racism. And we're going to stay with that topic for this month's movie night, where we're going to be showing parts of Spike Lee's award-winning documentary, When the Levees Broke, a requiem in 4 acts about the devastation of New Orleans, Louisiana, following the failure of the levees during Hurricane Katrina. We're going to kick off with, as usual, making a movie night drink, and then watch the film together, and after the show, Spike Lee himself will be joining me for a discussion. You won't want to miss it. Thursday, May 27th, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Visit firedrillfriday.com/movie night to sign up. And like always, I need your help, so put your favorite drink recipe in the chat right now, and we'll pick one to feature next week. Before we get into the show, let's have some good news, okay? Good news. In a move applauded by environmentalists and indigenous groups on both sides of the border, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer in November ordered the Canadian oil pipeline Enbridge, the company Enbridge, to shut down the nearly 70-year-old Line 5 by May 12th, saying it jeopardizes the Great Lakes. Now, Canada says its continued operation is non-negotiable, but spokesperson Bobby Leddy said the governor stands by her decision, and Enbridge's continued operation of the lines after May 12th are unlawful. He says, quote, "These oil pipelines in the Straits of Mackinac are a ticking time bomb. Their continued presence violates the public trust and poses a grave threat to Michigan's environment and economy. Go Gretchen Whitmer." She's going to hang strong. You know, Enbridge is the company that I'm fighting up in northern Minnesota to stop the other Line 3. Another piece of good news. This one's really nice. A former dumping ground in Chicago is now a wildlife habitat. Indian Marsh Ridge was dumping ground for industrial waste and slag. Pollution spilled over beyond the marsh, and the predominantly Black and Latino communities on the southeast side of Chicago saw some of the worst pollution in the state. But over the last decade, over 480 tons of trash were removed, and the area is being reestablished as a wetland. Right on. We got a great show today. It's going to be very interesting. We're going to be having a conversation about how science, policy, and activism build on each other to advance climate justice and public health. We're going to be discussing the issue of oil exports and how frontline communities in the Gulf and around the country are fighting a mass expansion of toxic fuel infrastructure. Now, we know that the climate crisis is caused overwhelmingly by fossil fuel and poses an existential threat to every aspect of society. You know, the harms from fossil fuel extraction, export, and climate disruption fall first and worst on Black, Brown, Indigenous, and other communities of color and low-income communities. In order to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is in line with the Paris Climate Agreement, and advance environmental justice, the United States must not only stop producing and burning fossil fuels at home, but also stop exporting them to be burned elsewhere. At Fire Drill Fridays, we focused primarily in the last, over a month, on phasing out all fossil fuel production by ending subsidies. However, putting an end to exports is another very, very important piece of the puzzle. You see, absent an oil export ban, declining consumption in the US as we shift to green renewable energy isn't automatically going to lead to declining production. The oil and gas can still be extracted and then exported. And since we're all on the same planet, that cancels out a portion of the progress made in reducing fossil fuels because we now have electric vehicles and renewable energy and all that. However, US oil and gas exports are on the rise massively, driven by the fracking boom and enabled by Trump's reversal of the Obama-era oil export ban. And as a result, our chance of curbing the worst impacts of the climate emergency is in peril. A 2020 report found that oil exports have increased by, God, dig this, 750% since 2015. As of October 2019, 24%, that's a fourth of all crude oil that's extracted in the United States was exported. Gas exports are on a similar trajectory. The surge of oil and gas exports is driven by massive expansion of fracking, which has created booms and busts across the United States. Now, the latest and most dangerous oil and gas boom is in the Permian Basin, situated over approximately 6,000 square miles in West Texas and southeast New Mexico. The Permian is effectively the largest carbon bomb on the planet. Equivalent, this is amazing, it's equivalent to the annual emissions of 400 US coal plants. Effectively, every new barrel of Permian crude oil produced is exported, causing substantial and unnecessary harm to communities and to the climate along the way. If the dozens of projects under federal jurisdiction are built, Gulf Coast communities are going to suffer significant impacts of added pollution and then take a double hit when the climate disasters strike. The urgency of changing course is all too real for Gulf Coast communities that were hit by the 2020 record-breaking hurricane season and the 2021 infrastructure crippling deep freeze after never fully recovering from Hurricane Katrina. We're going to talk today about how both the scientific and frontline communities are fighting like hell to address these issues. I'm joined by two amazing women who are going up against the biggest challenges, speaking truth to power and tackling the climate crisis through science, policy, and public-facing activism. Diane Wilson is a fourth-generation shrimper, boat captain, mother of five, author, and an environmental peace and social justice advocate. As of May 11th of this year, Wilson is on her 36th day of a hunger strike to stop the dredging of the mercury-contaminated Matagorda Lavaca Bay. The dredging is for the sole purpose of allowing Max Midstream, a pipeline company, to bring its Supermax ships into the harbor to export crude oil from the Permian and Eagle Ford basins. Wilson is asking President Biden to reinstate the ban on oil exports and for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to revoke the dredging of the Matagorda Channel project. If the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers allows it to proceed, the proposed dredging of the Matagorda ship channel would unearth potentially devastating mercury contamination from a Superfund site in Lavaca Bay, destroying fisheries that local communities are working to restore and revitalize. This dredging project just crashes community and the climate to create profit for oil companies. Diane went on her hunger strike. She recently, I think maybe even yesterday, ended it. But the hunger strike presented to the Biden administration a clear choice: protect or destroy a revitalizing, sustainable economy. We are also joined by Adrienne Hollis, the Senior Climate Justice and Health Scientist at the Union of Concerned Scientists, where she leads the development, design, and implementation of methods for assessing and documenting the health impacts of climate change on communities of color and other traditionally disenfranchised groups. Welcome to you both, Diane and Adrienne, and thanks so much for being here. And Diane, a personal thank you from the bottom of my heart for being willing to go on a hunger strike on behalf of the local fishing community in Lavaca Bay and on behalf of the planet.
Well, I appreciate it very much, Diane, and thank you for having me here. It's very important.
Why were you arrested yesterday, Diane?
I was arrested because we did a lockdown right in front of the U.S. Corps of Engineers in Galveston, Texas. And we had a boat, we had a motor, we had a coffin, and we were blocking the entrance to try to get Captain Timothy Vale's attention, because he is the one in the U.S. Corps of Engineers who can revoke that project, and he can at the very least force an environmental supplemental environmental impact study. So it was trying to get his attention.
Good for you. Adrienne, what was your journey from being a public health expert and academic to engaging directly with communities and being a policy advocate?
Well, great question. And first, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. Initially, my work was at the federal level for the government, and I felt like the work that I was doing was not impacting community, and it didn't help provide opportunities for communities to be heard and to give communities what they needed. So that was sort of like the impetus for my work, and along with living here on the Gulf Coast at that time, and just seeing the devastation, caused by climate change and systemic racism.
And how have you as a scientist, or have you as a scientist and public health expert, engaged with environmental justice communities?
Yes, I have. Actually, that is the sort of premise for my work is at the Union of Concerned Scientists. It's sort of, it's a unique opportunity for communities to partner with them so that community science becomes a bigger, plays a bigger role in decision-making processes and in policy development and things of that nature. So we're in the process of strengthening or developing partnerships, equal partnerships with our environmental justice partners.
That's so important. I love the expression that's become like a motto: nothing about us without us.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
As communities say, if we're not at the table, we're on the menu.
Right. Yeah.
We want to change that way of thinking and acting. So
you're like the liaison between the frontline communities and the science community.
Well, I guess so. I consider myself to be more of a partner, and I do try to provide opportunities to connect the two, and also connect the communities with media when that opportunity presents itself, because ultimately they need to be heard, and the data and historic knowledge that they have needs to be shared and become part of any sort of analysis or action developed. They need to be a part of that, need to be at the table. So,
well, since we intend to be there, Fire Drill Friday intends to be in Houston and Galveston in 2022. Maybe you and Diane can help us raise a ruckus.
I hope so. We partner with a couple of communities in and around Houston, in Texas, Tejas, with Montaz Group and Hilton Kelly and CETA. So I hope so. I'm looking forward to it.
Hey, Diane, you ended your hunger strike yesterday or the day before. Is it the first time you did a hunger strike to protest the climate crisis?
No, I've been on 8 hunger strikes,
Wow.
8 different ones, and I ended it yesterday after I got out of jail. I said I would stay on it as long as I was in jail, and when I got out yesterday, about 3 o'clock.
How do you feel?
I feel fine now. I had Mexican food.
I'm glad. Thank you for being so courageous. Are you affiliated with any particular local organization?
Well, I've had a little group since 1989. It was called the Calhoun County Resource Watch, and in about 2012, I figured I needed a little solidarity outside Texas, so I made an application to be a member of the Water Alliance, Bobby Kennedy's group. And so I'm a San Antonio Bay Estuarine Waterkeeper.
The Waterkeeper. Oh, sure. I'm very familiar with that.
Right.
Yeah.
A very good group.
Adrienne, how has systemic racism played a role in the public health impacts of climate change?
Oh, gosh. Well, that's a great question. And systemic racism is the underlying factor for all of that, because if communities hadn't been redlined and placed in certain areas, for example, locally undesirable land use talks about placing facilities in communities because others didn't want it in their community, right? And between that and redlining, which placed us in areas that are not desirable, we are at the forefront of environmental injustice compounded by climate change, which, as you said earlier, and as we all know, is a threat multiplier because of this, and because communities are more at risk because of all of these challenges that they face. And it all stems from the systemic racism, where the thought is that these communities are not as valuable as other people in this country. And I think the same can be said globally. That they're throwaways.
Sacrifice zones.
Right, exactly. Thank you. You were in my head.
Yeah. Hop Hopkins, a climate activist who works with the Sierra Club, he said, if there were not racism, there'd be no climate crisis.
That's true.
Yeah.
Everybody would be affected. And, if that's the thing about, right, the climate crisis, that we have to make it personal to everybody. Because once you do that, then people who normally don't get involved start caring because it affects them.
And how can we increase access to science and data for the frontline and environmental justice communities?
That's a great question. And the main way to do that is to simply look around the table and see who's not there, and acknowledge that these communities and entities deserve a place at the table, an equal place at the table, and that they have knowledge that's valuable that you need in order to reach any decision. And I think once we do that, the change will be impactful. The data that comes out will be impactful. And I think it's going to really affect the way we address climate change.
That's smart. I'm going to tell a story on Bill Gates that I know you both will relate to, especially you, Diane, since you're a fisherwoman. So, I think one of the problems with some of the Gates Foundation projects is they don't really have eyes on the ground. And so in an effort to stop malaria, they sent millions of dollars of mosquito netting that was full of anti-malarial medicines of some sort, to kill mosquitoes.
Right.
And they sent it into some countries in Africa. Well, of course, the communities are poor and they use the nets for fishing, right? Not for mosquito nets. And it ended up killing the fish.
Yeah.
This is what happens when the people on the ground aren't at the table, right?
That's right. This is what happens when you don't talk to the people who are going to be most affected, because they told them that that's not what they needed, right?
Yeah. Diane, speaking of, if the dredging doesn't happen, Will the mercury contamination in the Matagorda ship channel of Lavaca Bay simply remain in active sediment, or are there plans to clean it up properly? I mean, doesn't it contaminate the water even if it's sediment?
Well, the thing of it is, when they first did that, the Superfund, they were trying to find techniques that would get rid of the mercury, and there's just no way to get rid of the mercury. There's no technique. So, for instance, if you tried to pick up the mercury that's in the sediment, it would just go through and just sink even further. So the way they have contained it here is, for instance, there's a big lagoon right in the middle of the bay, and Alcoa had been using a pipe and dumped all of this mercury out into this lagoon, except it would breach and it would come back down and it would leak out the sides. And so they decided during the Superfund, they would cover it with clay and hopefully it wouldn't leak out again. But we have all these hurricanes. We had a stage up to a stage 4 hurricane with the last hurricane that we had, and a lot of the mercury that is seeped off the land is, there's hot spots where I was doing the hunger strike. There were like 3 signs, big, huge signs that said, don't eat the fish, don't eat the crabs. And it was all in Vietnamese, it was in Hispanic, and it was in English. And so the dredging, what it will do is just resuspend it, because even the U.S. Corps of Engineers said down in the bottom of that channel is where the methyl mercury sank. And you start dredging 9 feet down and you're going to hit that methyl mercury and just send it all over the bay. And it's going to be a catastrophe. It really will. It will. Right now, the level of mercury in the redfish, a prize game fish that fishermen love, sportsmen love, and it is the same level with mercury it was in 1997. And it could possibly contaminate the whole bay, and you could ruin a fishery and the economics of fishermen trying to revive their community.
Wow.
A mess. It's a mess.
Did you get any reaction from President Biden or his administration?
I got not a peep out of anybody. They're quiet as church mice, is what they are.
What's the next step?
The next step is to build resistance. We are going to build a unreasonable women resistance camp, and we are going to be prepared. And like I said, what we just gave was a small, polite nod to the colonel sitting up there in the U.S. Corps of Engineers. And next time we're not going to be so polite.
Mm-hmm. And can you mobilize the other fisher people?
Oh yeah, matter of fact, that's one people I can mobilize. And I actually got the because we got a sustainable fishery co-op just started with some of the money that we got from Formosa settlement, and I got every single fisherman in that co-op to sign in opposition to that dredging. And fishermen are notorious, very conservative. So they're good. They're good guys.
Wow, good for you. Adrienne, how can scientists develop research processes and analyses that's embedded in justice and serves the needs of frontline communities?
Well, now that science is, I guess, back in vogue with this administration, thank God, and we understand the importance of science, I think working with that, to answer that question, they've got to work in conjunction with the needs of the community. So what they need to do is develop opportunities for input from these communities, right? What do you need and what can we provide? What can we work on together? And can't go in and just do a thing, you know, that you think is necessary. You've got to ask the questions, as what you just told us was a perfect example. And so I think that what we need to do is step outside our silos as scientists and do more on the ground interaction with communities.
Maybe maybe you and other members of the Union of Concerned Scientists can help Diane in her fight there.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, you should absolutely, because we're in the process of working with partners, and you know, of course, I have a personal stake in this. You know, although we didn't do game fishermen, we did go out crabbing and all of those things growing up. Probably not in the way people do it now, but so you know, being here in Mobile, I know the impact on fishermen that just from the BP oil spill. So we can definitely, I think, do some things together.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I would love your input.
Diane, I was going to ask you why you chose, that particular site to do your activism and your fasting, et cetera. But, it's very clear to me now. It's because that's where you live and that's where you have your fishing business. And so I want to know, how can we support you, Diane? How can the Fire Drill Friday audience support you?
Well, there's still a website up. It's called Hunger Strike to Stop the Dredging and Stop Oil Exports. And so we're still asking for people to send a call to Colonel Timothy Vail. We're asking, and now they won't even answer. They say, write us an email. So write them an email. We're trying to get anybody to shake that door, and we're anybody who can reach Biden about this, this whole project and the oil. Matter of fact, if he reinstated the oil export, then there would not be a man with the money. He's got the money to do it. And that's why everybody around our county is just jumping in line. It's like, he's got the money to do it, so they're gonna do it. And so anybody who has any influence in that, and also, like I said, we're starting a resistance camp, and we will make sure if that dredge starts coming in, we will be prepared. So we'll have information coming out on the resistance camp, but we have just begun to fight here. We won't stop.
Do you have the Army Corps guy's email? Can you put it in the chat room?
I don't have it with me, and
Okay.
I would have to be hunting, but
Okay.
yes, I do have it.
Okay. When you say he's got the money, who are you exactly referring to? Are you referring to the dredging company, the oil company that can hire local people and kind of buy them off?
What it is Max Midstream just came out of the blue, never heard of it, never heard of the guy who's doing all the talking down here named Todd Edwards in Houston. And he's got a foreign funder with the last name of Tola, and he's into mines in Africa in fancy hotels, and he's a billionaire, and he says he is given Max Midstream $360 million to do the dredging. And to see, the thing is, normally it's the navigation district that's got to come up with money, and here you got a man with all the money. And so it was like, well, why not? Yeah. And so they got in partnership, and they're going, by God, and they are pushing it. They're expediting every single process. You got mercury contamination. They want to bury 700 acres, and they're expediting it. They're doing it as fast as they can. And so anyway, yeah, there's money. There's money behind it all.
Wow. Thank you for explaining it. Thank you. Adrienne, the fossil fuel industry avoids accepting responsibility, as you know, for its role in contributing to the climate crisis. And it's made claims that their practices don't harm communities. How do we dispel these lies? And how do we make sure that decision makers listen to the demands of science and justice and not just the interests of the fossil fuel industry?
Well, I think the first way is we've got to call out the lies. And, you know, like UCS has a disinformation program where we're actually identifying and calling it out. And we all need to do that. We need to hold them responsible. We already know that they knew years ago that this was happening, that this was going to get worse. And so here's another opportunity for science and the general public to work together, because together we can call this out. We can acknowledge that this is not what the data is showing. This is not what history is showing. We have so many different partners who can work together, you know, to address this. So everybody has to step out, step up, and start working together and stop thinking of the individual and think of the we, right, in this process. And I think that if we do that, if we continually hold them to the fire like we do and call out the lies, that they won't have a proverbial leg to stand on. You know, we have the truth behind us. So.
Right on. Hey, Maddie, let's get some audience questions.
Absolutely. We have a lot coming in.
Yeah.
So from Sarah on Zoom, Adrienne, how can federal agencies and the Biden administration address the public health impacts of climate change?
Great question. And I have to give a shout out to the executive orders that were released that talked about incorporating environmental justice into the work that federal agencies do. And so now we need to make that happen, right? And that means pulling in a larger number of people who work in the environmental justice space and listening to them as experts. And I'm talking about community members who've been doing this work for years, more years than I or a lot of other people have been involved in the process. And that's always been a challenge, because for the most part, there are those, not everyone, in federal agencies who think I'm the expert, I know the answers, so why do I have to listen to anybody else? Well, we have to step outside of that, step outside of how we thought. You know, I've been trained in this, but you haven't been trained in the everyday things that people go through, the everyday challenges, the deaths, the leukemia, the asthma, you know, all of those things. That's what you need to hear. So it's listening more before acting. That's where we need to be.
Thank you. From Carla on Facebook, Diane, has President Biden responded to your letter, and what are your next steps?
President Biden has not responded to our demands yet. Neither has the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We are continuing to ask for emails and phone calls to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in Galveston, Texas. And right the day after the hunger strike and being arrested, we are now planning more resistance to the owners of the pipeline, to the workings of the dredge, and we're forming a women's resistance camp, and we'll soon have information out there for people who want to join and be a part of the resistance to stop the dredging.
I noticed that the Army Corps guy whose name you've cited, it's in the chat room. Somebody put it in the chat room.
Oh, good.
Contact him, and also how to contact your work. Everybody, it's all in there.
Thank you, Jane.
Go to the chat room to find out how you can help.
Great. From Raul, can someone please explain what a Superfund site is? I've been hearing the term a lot, but I'm not exactly sure what it means.
A Superfund site is, and Adrienne might have a better technological explanation, but I'll tell you a layman's explanation. It's an abandoned, contaminated site. And normally there used to be a few funds to get it cleaned up, but no more. And so what they had to do was kind of put pressure on Alcoa to end up doing the cleanup. I mean, there had to be a lot of pressure, and they were actually getting local officials to go to the EPA and try to make sure it wasn't declared a Superfund site. But what it does, all of these agencies get involved, and they find out how much contamination there is, where it's at, and they start looking in ways to clean it up. But like the and then I think they have a certain period of time and they hopefully it's cleaned up and there's closure and it's not contaminated. But like I said, the Superfund site at Alcoa, the mercury one, it was never, the fish are still contaminated. The mercury signs are still out there. There has never been a health study done, which is supposed to happen. And so basically, there's many out there, and I think there are probably a lot of unhappy people who live around them.
Yep. Do you want to add to anything to that, Adrienne?
I do. That was absolutely perfect. And I'm going to add that, a lot of these sites, just as you described, they are unlined and they're in communities where poor people live and people of color, and they contaminate the area. These communities live in the shadow, in the presence of these facilities. And a lot of them are not cleaned up. Some that have been on the Superfund list. And the reason they call it Superfund, I think you said that kind of, Diane, is that there was money set aside called a Superfund. And I'm not sure that it's not what it used to be, the amount. And they were supposed to, EPA was supposed to fine people who, F-I-N-E, people who did the contamination. That hasn't always been successful. Now add that to climate change. You have these old facilities in place. Now the communities are more at risk because these tanks overturn, or the holding ponds like the lagoon you talked about, Diane, can leak in the community when there's flooding. So the Superfunds are a double hazard. They were a hazard initially, and now with climate change, it's even worse.
That's right.
Add that. Thank you.
Right on. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. For one of our guests on Zoom, can someone speak on the oil export ban? If that was reinstated, would the dredging stop?
Well, like I said, I can probably say a layman's explanation. I'm sure Adrienne can do a much better scientific term. But as you said a little while earlier, Jane, it was like how much from 2015 when it was lifted to now, the amount of the oil coming from the fracking and the Eagle Ford and the Permian Basin is like 750%. Well, if he can put this ban, reinstate it, and on the campaign trail, Biden said that he was agreeing to that. It would stop this export in its tracks. And I might mention that the whole time I was sitting out there on that hunger strike, I would have these workers come by, and one was kind of like a potential whistleblower. And he said, there is a line of these pipelines company right behind it, and they want to make it look like Corpus Christi. And here we have this little fishing community, and they're going to wipe it out with industrial exports and barges and super tankers, and that will be the end of our communities.
I mean, I think if we could stop the subsidies and reinstate the export oil ban, that would really bring us very close to phasing out of fossil fuel. Do you agree, Adrienne?
I do agree. I do agree. So, I mean, there's nothing else to add. It's got to be people over profit.
Right.
That's a problem.
From your mouth to God's ear. Yes. And we're going to do it.
I hope so.
We will.
Adrienne, we have a question for you from Lakeisha on Zoom. Can you please tell us a little bit more about the Union of Concerned Scientists? Is the climate crisis your main concern?
The climate crisis is one of the issues that we deal with, certainly. It is one of the issues that I deal with a lot, most definitely, because of the fact that it exacerbates existing health issues and concerns in the community. But the Union of Concerned Scientists works on other issues around clean transportation, electric vehicles. We work on issues even around Superfund and the facilities as they exist and the threat that they pose, particularly with climate change. We work on issues like heat, outdoor workers, and their exposure to extreme weather conditions. I'm missing global we have a project. We have a food equity and justice program, and that is not the name of it. That's Adrienne's name for it, Under Pressure. But so we cover a lot of issues. All of them are so important to communities, to the public, but particularly from my perspective, to those who are affected first and worst.
Adrienne, let me ask you something, because you're so embedded in the whole climate and health. Isn't it true that with the melting of the ice sheet and the glaciers, that a lot of pathogens that we have never heard of or seen before are going to be released, and the risk of many more pandemics is going to increase?
Now, Jane, so this is not my area of expertise, but I have read in the literature that that is a possibility, but I can't speak to it professionally, but I have read that also.
Yeah. I have too. Yes.
I know that COVID is not the last thing that we're going to see. And that's why we need to take the lessons that we should have learned with Katrina and have a plan in place.
Right. Right.
Adrienne. From Robin on Zoom, Diane, can we hear a little bit more about your other hunger strikes and your fight against other petrochemical projects?
Oh yeah, well, like I said, I'm a late bloomer. I didn't start till I was 40 years old. And so, but for 30 years, I have been really been after Formosa plastics, because they are kind of a notorious polluter. You know, they was even kicked out of Taiwan, their homeland, because they were so polluted. But the thing of it is, and where did they go directly to? It was either Texas or Louisiana. Whoever could give them the most money, tax abatement, expedited visas, no environmental reports, anything like that. And so the one I started with was with Formosa. And Formosa, when they started their expansion, they were asking for like $1.7 billion expansion. This was 1989. And at that time, it was the biggest expansion in Texas history. It was the biggest in the United States in 10 years. And so, I mean, the governors, the attorney generals, a man run for president from Texas, all of them, everybody, they were giving them everything they wanted, the Chamber of Commerce, you name it, they were for them. And I was trying to fight. Frankly, I was trying to fight them coming in, because I knew what they was going to do to the Bay. And but eventually there were, from where I'm from, the local officials, the senators, everybody is even given contracts. They're given defibrillators, they're given police cars, they're given whole computer systems to sheriffs. And so it was kind of like a done deal. And even the real savvy environmentalists out of Houston, they came and told me, they said, Diane, it's a done deal. He said, pat yourself on the back and say you did a real good job, but it's over with. And he said, you're at the end of the parade. And I said, they're not going to get that bay. He said, there's nothing you can do. And I mean, off the top of my head, I said, I'm going to do a hunger strike. And he had a big laugh and he said, nobody does hunger strikes in Texas. They might do them in California, but they don't do them here. And I said, I'm gonna do one. And I did. And I knew nothing about hunger strikes. All I knew was you didn't eat. So I did a hunger strike on a shrimp boat in Lavaca Bay. This was before cell phones. I didn't have a cell phone. The only person that knew I was on a hunger strike was Formosa Plastics. And every day, the regulatory affairs man in management would bring about 7 engineers in suits. They'd climb on the boat and they'd come and look at me and he'd say, now, isn't that a stupid woman? And then he'd say, Diane, you're shooting yourself in the foot. And then he'd say, oh, please, Diane, get off a hunger strike. He was scared to death of that hunger strike. And later, that's what amazing. In 2 weeks, I got exactly what I wanted. And that's when I realized the power of a hunger strike. It was that first one. They are, I believe it's key to the universe, somehow in that intention and putting yourself out there where you're uncomfortable and just head right for it.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Diane. Wow.
Thank you, Diane.
The power of putting yourself on the line, everybody.
That's true.
Important lesson to learn. God bless you.
Question that we have is for Adrienne. Adrienne, this question is from Callum on Zoom. How can white people be good or better allies to people of color in the fight against environmental racism?
That's an interesting question because there's a lot of discussion around white allyship and what that looks like. And in my, there's a lot of opinions, so I can only give you my opinion. And it's really about, if you believe in something, speak up. That is, to me, being supportive and being a good ally. Speak up and speak out. And when you can't, but always always keep in mind the voices of the environmental justice community, the people of color, rural people, because the number one rule under under the Hermes principles is that communities speak for themselves. So speak up, but don't speak for someone else, but speak up in support of, right? Not in place of. And just, there's no rule, there's no formula. It's all about making your presence known and being a part of something that you believe in. And that is where the support comes in. And it's also about helping us to ensure that organizations like funding entities start diverting money directly to communities, because that's who needs, they need the money to do the work. And we need voices to say that, right? Other than, and in addition to communities and those in the science community and those in academia, speak up. So I guess that's my main message. Talk, speak up.
Thank you, Adrienne. And we have another question for you, switching gears a little bit, from Jolene on Facebook. How can the next infrastructure package tackle environmental justice?
For me?
Yes.
Well, yet again, so many ways, because, first question, what does infrastructure mean to everybody? Because to me, it means not only roads and providing transportation to communities who, because of climate gentrification or gentrification in general, have been pushed out of areas where they live, which could be close to where they work. They've been pushed further out, and now they need a way to get back in. Infrastructure also means putting in place the financial means so that communities don't have to take menial jobs that put them at risk. It also means having homes that are safe. And by safe, I mean that you're not heating the outside when you turn on your heater, or cooling it when you turn on your air conditioner, or that you have air and heat, and that they are such that they aren't contaminated. And we know, and that is the case in a lot of places. So, and when we talk about infrastructure, we're talking about not splitting a community with a highway, because that happens a lot, right? That they put a highway in between a community that's been there for years. And when we do things like that, and we think about how infrastructure affects people, and we hear the voices, we hear the examples from communities, then we can make decisions about what good infrastructure should look like, right? So it's not a decision we can make on our own for communities. It's a decision that we make with communities, because infrastructure has so many different needs.
Thank you, Adrienne. I have a question for both of you, Diane and Adrienne, from Nazareth on Zoom. Should we feel hopeful about Biden being a climate president? How do we support the good things he's doing and still keep the pressure on?
Well, I can tell you the on the ground way I do it is I like him. I like what he's doing. I am so pleased. I'm so pleased after what was before. And so I don't have any problem with the good that he has done, but I think it's very important we keep the pressure on. I know a lot of times there have been environmentalists have been around someone they think is a good politician, and they say, "Oh, don't do anything because he's a good one, and we don't want to do anything against him." And so you get nothing out of them. And so I believe we have to keep the pressure up, but I like Biden.
Yeah, and I'm going to agree with Diane. I like Biden too, but I think the question answers itself because we do keep the pressure on. That's what we do. We keep them accountable. I love the fact that I love all of the executive orders that came out, particularly in that the first month or so, because they were well thought out. And if each one was actually carried out, you'd have what we look like, right? You'd have protections for everyone, a diverse population where we all get along and work together and have livable incomes. So now that you've done that, let's make sure that happens. You wrote it, let's make sure that you can stand behind it, put your money where your mouth is. So while, I don't work on the ground in the way that Diane does, I guess I work with the communities and I speak and I write a lot about issues and you call a thing out, and we all need to do that, right? And so we need to have watch, I don't know if I want to say watchdogs, but we need to have people who are watching every move and willing to make a mistake. I mean, willing to call out an issue when a mistake is made. I tell my cousin is, and I don't know, I shouldn't say this, but is the Secretary of Defense, right? And I told him that I'm watching you. And as you do something wrong, plus trust and believe that I will call you out, and so far I'm happy what he does too. But with this whole administration, so far I'm happy with what they're saying, but I'm looking, as we all are. We all attend meetings and raise questions and make comments, and we need to continue doing that and do more. And we need more Dianes out there that we can support. As I was telling Jane earlier, why I'm not the kind of activist that Diane is, although I would like to be. But we need more people like Diane, and we do. We have a lot of groups, but we need more. So, accountability is the key word today.
I just love you too. I wish I could put my arms around you and hug you. And I have so many more questions, especially for you, Diane, like how come in a community that tends to be conservative, how come you are the way you are, and what do your 5 children think of it and all that? But when Fire Drill Friday comes to Galveston, I'll be there and I'll take you to dinner and we'll ask all those questions. And you, Adrienne, we've been together for actions in the Superdome in New Orleans, and we'll see you in DC when a Fire Drill Friday comes back to DC, okay?
Yes.
Thank you so much. It's
so much.
Time to close now, and I'm just really grateful. And for all of you for joining us today. We've talked about the many ways to take action and affect change, from science to direct action. It's just so important to uplift our differences and know that there's a meaningful place in this movement for each one of us. Now, we've been talking a lot about legislative initiatives in the last few months, like End Polluter Welfare Act and the Thrive Initiative. I want to bring your attention to the fact that Congress is preparing to go on recess come June. This is the chance for every single one of us to meet virtually with our representatives and let them know that their top priorities should be immediately ending fossil fuel subsidies. They cost billions of dollars, and leading the way on a Green New Deal style recovery to COVID-19. You know, just remember back in the day when the Affordable Care Act was about to be taken away from us, what saved it, besides McCain's thumbs down, but what really saved it was people flooding the town halls when their representatives were home for recess, flooding their offices, calling them, talking to them, writing to them, all of that. It really, really, really makes a difference. We have a once in a generation opportunity to rebuild and remake our economy in a way that puts people and the planet first. I mean, if there was ever a moment for course correction, this is it. Every one of us has a representative who can help say no to fossil fuels and yes to a Green New Deal. We need to make sure that our leaders do everything in their power to seize this opportunity. And we can make our voices heard by setting up a meeting with our representatives during their recess, which is June 1st through 4th, I think. This is one of the most powerful ways you can influence your member of Congress. And if you've never done it before, don't worry. We're going to provide a toolkit with everything you need and follow up to provide personal one-on-one coaching to ensure you are fully supported every step of the way. And you know the drill. To make change, we got to take action. So go to firedrillfriday.com, take action, to find out how to hold a lobby meeting with your representative and tell them to put people over and the planet over profit. And while you're there, don't forget to sign up for movie night. Don't miss next week's show where we're going to dive into a powerful report on fossil fuel racism and talk with an amazing panel of activists and scholars about how to confront it. I'm so grateful to be in community with all of you. I'll see you next time.